The rain had been falling all morning when Elena stepped off the bus on Fifth Avenue. She was 22 years old, and she had never been to this part of the city before. The buildings here were taller, cleaner, shinier. The people walked faster, dressed better, and nobody looked at anyone else. It was a different world, just 40 minutes from the cramped apartment where she had grown up. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, clutching a folder of sheet music against her chest. The folder was old, held together with tape in two places. Inside were pages she had printed at the public library, music she had studied for months, notes she had written to herself in the margins. This folder contained everything she had been working toward. Across the street stood the Hartwell Hotel. It was one of those buildings that seemed to exist in its own universe. Gold trim on the doors. A doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Through the tall windows, she could see chandeliers hanging from ceilings so high they made her dizzy just looking at them. Today, the Hartwell Foundation was holding auditions for its annual scholarship competition. The winner would receive $50,000 and a chance to study at one of the best music schools in the country. For most of the contestants, this was an opportunity to add another achievement to an already impressive list. For Elena, it was something else entirely. It was a lifeline. She crossed the street and walked toward the entrance. Her shoes were uncomfortable. She had bought them at a thrift store 2 days ago because they were the only dressy shoes in her size. They pinched her toes and made a squeaking sound when she walked. Her dress was also from a thrift store, a simple black dress that she had spent an hour altering so it would fit properly. There was a small tear near the hem that she had mended with careful stitches, hoping nobody would notice. The doorman looked at her as she approached. His expression was polite but distant, the kind of look that sized people up in half a second and made a judgment. Elena kept her head high and walked through the door he held open for her. Inside, the lobby took her breath away. She had seen fancy hotels in movies, but standing in one was different. The floor was marble, polished so bright she could see her own reflection. Fresh flowers sat in vases taller than children. Soft music played from somewhere she could not see, and everywhere. People moved with a confidence she did not feel. She found the sign that pointed toward the audition registration and followed it down a hallway lined with paintings. Other contestants were already there, waiting in a large room with velvet chairs and gold-framed mirrors. Elena stopped in the doorway and felt her stomach tighten. These were not people like her. A girl about her age sat nearby, chatting with an older woman who was clearly her private music instructor. The girl wore a dress that looked like it had been made specifically for her body. Her hair was perfect. Her nails were perfect. Everything about her seemed polished and prepared. Nearby, a young man was reviewing notes with his father, who spoke in a low voice about the judges and the performance order as if he had inside information. Another contestant carried a violin case that probably cost more than everything Elena owned combined. She did not belong here. The thought hit her hard and fast, and for a moment she considered turning around. She could go back to the bus stop, ride home, and forget this whole thing. Nobody would know. Nobody would care. But then she thought about her mother. Her mother was the reason she was here. 3 years ago, her mother had been diagnosed with a condition that required ongoing treatment, medications, and regular hospital visits. The bills piled up faster than Elena could pay them, no matter how many hours she worked at the dry cleaners. She had been working double shifts for 2 years now, waking up at 5 in the morning and not getting home until 10 at night. Her hands were rough from the chemicals. Her back ached constantly. And still, the debt grew. Music was the only thing that had ever made sense to Elena. When she was 16, she had found a keyboard in a dumpster behind her apartment building. It was broken, missing 3 keys, and the power cord was frayed. But she had carried it upstairs, fixed what she could, and taught herself to play using videos she watched on her phone. She had no teacher, no formal lessons, no one to tell her if she was doing it right. She just played hour after hour till her fingers knew the keys better than they knew anything else. Over the years, she had gotten good. Really good? Neighbors would stop in the hallway to listen when she practiced. A man who lived 2 floors up, a retired music teacher, had once knocked on her door just to tell her she had a gift. "You play like someone who has something to say," he told her. She had never forgotten those words. When she heard about the Hartwell scholarship, she knew she had to try. $50,000 would change everything. It would pay for her mother's treatment. It would give her a chance to study properly. It would prove that all those years of teaching herself on a broken keyboard had meant something. So here she was, standing in a room full of people who had never had to wonder if they could afford dinner. Trying to convince herself that she deserved to be here too, she walked to the registration table. A woman sat behind it, wearing a headset and typing on a laptop. She had the kind of smile that was friendly but not warm, professional but not personal. "Name?" the woman asked without looking up. "Alina Vasquez." The woman typed, then frowned slightly. She looked at her screen, then at Alina, then back at the screen. "You're listed as a piano contestant?" "Yes, and your instructor." "Are they here with you?" "I don't have an instructor. I'm self-taught." The woman's eyebrows rose just a little. It was a small movement, but Alina caught it. She had seen that look before. It was the look people gave when they were trying to hide their surprise, or their doubt, or their pity. "I see," the woman said slowly. "And you've prepared a piece for the audition?" "Japan, Ballade number 1 in G minor." Now both eyebrows went up. The woman studied Alina for a long moment, as if trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. The Chopin Ballade was one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire. Professional musicians spent years mastering it. And here was a girl in a thrift store dress, with no formal training, claiming she was going to perform it. "That's quite ambitious," the woman said carefully. "I've been practicing for 8 months." The woman nodded slowly, then handed Alina a number on a lanyard. "You're contestant 47? The preliminary round begins in 1 hour. Someone will call your number when it's your turn. Good luck." Alina took the lanyard and found a seat in the corner of the room. Away from the other contestants and their instructors and their expensive clothes, she opened her folder and looked at the music, even though she had memorized every note long ago. It was something to do with her hands, something to focus on while her heart raced and her mind kept telling her she was making a mistake around her. The other contestants chatted and laughed and reviewed their pieces with confidence. They belonged here. They had been preparing for moments like this their whole lives. Alina had been preparing too, but in a different way. In a smaller apartment, with a broken keyboard, with no one to guide her except the stubborn voice inside that refused to give up, she looked down at her mended dress, her uncomfortable shoes, her taped-together folder. She thought about her mother at home, waiting for news, hoping for a miracle. She thought about all the nights she had practiced until her fingers cramped. All the mornings she had woken up exhausted and gone to work anyway. All the times she had been told that people like her did not get chances like this. Then she took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She was here now, and she was not going to leave without playing. The preliminary round was held in a smaller ballroom on the second floor. Alina waited in line with the other contestants, watching as one by one they were called inside to perform for a panel of 3 judges. Most of them came out looking confident, some even smiling. A few looked nervous, unsure if they had done well enough to advance. When her number was finally called, Alina walked into the room on shaky legs. The piano sat in the center, a beautiful grand piano that gleamed under the soft lights. She had never played on an instrument like this. The keyboard she practiced on at home had plastic keys and a tinny sound. This piano looked like it belonged in a museum. The judges sat behind a long table, papers spread out in front of them. They looked tired, like people who had been listening to music all day and were ready for it to be over. One of them, an older man with gray hair and glasses, glanced at her folder and raised an eyebrow. "Chopin?" he asked. "The first Ballade." "Yes, sir." He exchanged a look with the woman next to him. Alina could not read their expressions, but she had a feeling they were thinking the same thing as the woman at the registration table. Who was this girl, and what made her think she could handle such a difficult piece? She sat down at the piano and placed her fingers on the keys. They were smooth and cool, nothing like the rough plastic she was used to. For a moment, she just sat there, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it. Everything she had worked for came down to the next few minutes. She began to play. The first notes filled the room, soft and haunting. Alina closed her eyes and let the music take over. She forgot about the judges, forgot about the fancy hotel, forgot about everything except the story she was telling through her fingers. The ballade was a conversation between hope and sorrow, between struggle and beauty. It was her life, translated into sound. When she finished, she opened her eyes and looked at the judges. The older man was leaning forward in his chair, his expression different now. The woman beside him was writing something on her notepad. The third judge, a younger man who had seemed bored before, was staring at her with his mouth slightly open. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then the older man cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Vasquez. We'll post the results in an hour." Lena stood, gathered her folder, and walked out of the room. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had no idea if she had done well, or if she had just embarrassed herself in front of people who had dedicated their lives to music. All she could do now was wait. She found a quiet corner in the hallway and sat down on a bench near a window. Outside, the rain had stopped and the sun was trying to break through the clouds. She watched the light shift across the wet streets and tried to calm her breathing. An hour passed slowly. Alina watched the other contestants come and go, some chatting excitedly, others pacing nervously. Finally, a staff member appeared with a list and pinned it to a board near the registration desk. Everyone rushed forward to look. Alina hung back, afraid to see her name missing from the list. But eventually she forced herself to walk over and look. Her name was there. Contestant 47, Alina Vasquez, advancing to the final round. She stared at it for a long moment, not quite believing it was real. She had made it. Out of over 100 contestants, she had made it to the finals. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to smile. The final round would be held that evening in the grand ballroom in front of an audience of donors, critics, and music lovers. The stakes were higher now. This was where the real competition began. Alina spent the afternoon preparing. She found a quiet room where she could review her music and calm her nerves. She called her mother to tell her the news, and her mother cried on the phone, telling her how proud she was, how she had always known Alina was special. The call gave Alina the strength she needed to keep going. As evening approached, the hotel transformed. Staff members set up hundreds of chairs in the grand ballroom. Caterers prepared trays of food and drinks. Photographers tested their equipment. This was not just a competition anymore. It was an event, the kind of thing that would be written about in newspapers and talked about at dinner parties. Alina changed into her dress again, smoothing out the wrinkles as best she could. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and tried to see what the judges would see. A young woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple style. A dress that was clearly not expensive. Eyes that showed both fear and determination. She made her way backstage, where the other finalists were gathering. There were 12 of them now. 12 musicians who had survived the preliminary round and earned the right to perform tonight. Most of them seemed to know each other, chatting easily about instructors they shared and concerts they had attended. Alina stood alone, her folder pressed against her chest like a shield. That was when she saw him. Richard Hartwell III was impossible to miss. He moved through the backstage area like he owned it, which, of course, he did. He was tall, with silver hair, and a suit that probably cost more than Elena's annual salary. He was surrounded by other men in expensive suits. Investors and business partners who laughed at his jokes and nodded at his opinions. Everyone seemed to orbit around him like he was the sun. Alina tried to stay invisible. But the backstage area was not very big. As Hartwell and his group walked past, he noticed her sitting alone on a folding chair in the corner. He stopped, looked at her for a moment, and then smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. "And who might you be?" he asked. Alina stood up quickly, nearly dropping her folder. "I'm one of the contestants, Alina Vasquez." Hartwell looked her up and down, taking in her thrift store dress, her uncomfortable shoes, her taped-together folder of music. His smile did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. It was the look of someone who had already made up his mind about her. "A contestant," he repeated, as if the word itself was amusing. And where did you train? Juilliard. The Manhattan Conservatory. I'm self-taught, sir. There was a moment of silence. The men around Hartwell exchanged glances. One of them coughed quietly. Then Hartwell laughed. It was not a polite laugh or a surprised laugh. It was a dismissive laugh, the kind that said he thought the whole situation was ridiculous. He looked at his associates and shook his head, still chuckling. Self-taught, he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. You can't seriously expect to play here. This competition is for real musicians, conservatory trained, people who have dedicated their lives to their craft. Alina felt her face grow hot. Other contestants were watching now. Staff members had stopped what they were doing to listen. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never be seen again. I've been playing for 6 years, she said quietly. I practice every day. Hartwell waved his hand dismissively. Anyone can bang on keys for 6 years. That doesn't make you a musician. This stage is for people who belong here, people who have earned the right to perform. He turned to one of his assistants, a young man with a clipboard who looked uncomfortable. Doesn't anyone screen these contestants? We can't have just anyone wandering in off the street. The assistant mumbled something about the audition process, about rules that allowed anyone who passed the preliminary round to perform. Hartwell frowned, but did not argue. Instead, he turned back to Alina with that cold smile. Well, good luck, I suppose. Try not to waste everyone's time. Then he walked away, his entourage following behind him. As he passed a group of donors, Alina heard him say something that made them laugh. She caught a few words. Street performer and doesn't know any better. She stood there, frozen, her hands shaking at her sides. The other contestants were looking at her now, some with pity. Others with the kind of relief that came from knowing they were not the ones being humiliated. Nobody said anything. Nobody defended her. Alina walked back to her chair and sat down. Her eyes were burning, but she refused to cry. She would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She opened her folder and looked at her music again. The notes blurred slightly, and she blinked hard to clear her vision. Hartwell's words echoed in her head. You can't play here. You don't belong. Stop wasting everyone's time. But beneath the hurt, something else was building. Something hot and fierce that she did not expect. She had been dismissed before. She had been underestimated her whole life. Teachers who thought she would never amount to anything. Employers who saw her as just another pair of hands. Strangers who looked through her like she was invisible, and she had proven them wrong. Every single time. Tonight would be no different. She closed her folder and lifted her chin. Let them laugh. Let them whisper. When she walked onto that stage, she would show them exactly what a girl from a cramped apartment with a broken keyboard could do. Richard Hartwell had made a mistake tonight, and soon he would know it. The grand ballroom was nothing like Alina had imagined. It was bigger, grander, more intimidating than anything she had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting a warm golden light over everything below. Hundreds of chairs had been arranged in perfect rows, and every single one of them was filled with someone important. Alina peeked through a gap in the curtain, felt her stomach drop. These were not ordinary people. She saw women wearing jewelry that sparkled like stars, men in suits that fit them like second skin. She recognized a few faces from magazines and television. Music critics, philanthropists, celebrities who supported the arts, and in the very front row, sitting like a king on his throne, was Richard Hartwell. He was chatting with the woman beside him, looking relaxed and confident. He had probably already forgotten about Alina, forgotten about the girl he had humiliated backstage. She was nothing to him, just a brief moment of amusement before the real entertainment began. Alina let the curtain fall closed and stepped back. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them against her sides and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The competition had already begun. One by one, the finalists were taking the stage and performing for the crowd. Alina listened from backstage as a young man played a complicated piece by Liszt, his fingers flying across the keys with precision. The audience applauded politely when he finished. Then a young woman performed a piece by Rachmaninoff, playing technically perfect but somehow cold. like a beautiful statue that could not breathe. Each performance made Alina more nervous. These were trained musicians, people who had spent years in the best schools with the best teachers. They knew things she did not know, techniques she had never learned, secrets of the craft that had been passed down to them by masters. What did she have? A broken keyboard, YouTube videos, 6 years of teaching herself in a tiny apartment while the neighbors complained about the noise. She thought about leaving. She could slip out the back door and disappear into the night. Nobody would miss her. Nobody would care. She could go home to her mother and pretend. This whole day had never happened. But then, she remembered something her mother had told her years ago, back when Alina was just starting to learn piano. Her mother had come home from work exhausted, her feet swollen and her back aching from standing all day. She had found Alina crying in her room because she could not get a piece right, could not make her fingers do what she wanted them to do. Her mother had sat beside her and taken her hands. "Do you know why I work so hard?" she had asked. "Because I want you to have choices. I want you to have a life where you can follow your heart, not just survive. But here's the thing, my love. Choices don't come to people who quit. They come to people who keep going even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." Alina had never forgotten those words, and she was not going to forget them now. A staff member appeared beside her. "Miss Vasquez, you're next." Alina nodded. She picked up her folder, even though she would not need it. Every note was already inside her, carved into her memory through thousands of hours of practice. She walked toward the stage entrance and waited. The contestant before her finished playing and the audience applauded. Then the host walked to the microphone and introduced the next performer. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome contestant number 47, Alina Vasquez. Performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." There was a polite smattering of applause, the kind given to someone nobody knew or expected much from. Alina stepped onto the stage and walked toward the piano. The spotlight was bright, almost blinding. She could not see individual faces in the audience, just a sea of darkness with occasional glints of jewelry and glasses. The piano waited for her, gleaming and beautiful. It was a Steinway, the finest piano in the world. She had read about these instruments, dreamed about touching one, but had never actually played on anything close to it. Her fingers would finally know what real music felt like. She sat down and adjusted the bench. The audience was silent, waiting. Somewhere in the front row, Richard Hartwell was probably checking his phone, already bored. Already dismissing her before she played a single note. Alina closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, sitting at home, probably praying. She thought about the broken keyboard that had been her first teacher. She thought about all the nights she had practiced until her fingers cramped. All the mornings she had woken up before dawn to squeeze in an hour of playing before work. She thought about every person who had ever told her she could not do something, and how she had done it anyway. Then she began to play. The first notes of the ballade floated into the air, soft and questioning. The piece began gently, like a story being told by a grandmother to a child, full of mystery and sadness. Alina let her fingers find their way across the keys, feeling the music rather than thinking about it. In the audience, something shifted. The polite disinterest that had greeted her entrance began to change. People stopped fidgeting. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the waiters at the back of the room stopped moving to listen. Alina did not notice. She was somewhere else now, lost in the world of the music. The ballade was a journey, and she was taking everyone with her. The melody grew stronger, more passionate, rising and falling like waves on a stormy sea. Her fingers moved faster, striking the keys with a power that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. This was not just technique. This was not just practice. This was something else entirely, something that could not be taught in any conservatory. It was raw emotion, pure and unfiltered, pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. In the front row, Richard Hartwell had stopped looking at his phone. He was staring at the stage now, his expression unreadable. The woman beside him leaned over and whispered something, but he did not respond. He could not take his eyes off the girl at the piano. The ballade reached its climax, a thundering cascade of notes that filled the ballroom like a storm. Alina's hands flew across the keyboard, hitting every note with perfect accuracy despite the impossible speed. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her heart pounded in her chest. But she did not slow down, did not hesitate, did not doubt herself for a single second. And then, slowly, the storm began to fade. The music softened, returning to the gentle questioning of the opening. But it was different now, deeper, sadder. Like someone who had been through a great trial and come out the other side changed forever. The final notes hung in the air, delicate as snowflakes, and then dissolved into silence. Alina lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched on, and Alina felt a cold fear grip her chest. Had she failed? Had she been so lost in the music that she had made mistakes without realizing it? Then someone in the back of the room started clapping. It spread like fire. One person became 2, became 10, became 100. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, applauding so loudly that Alina could feel the vibrations in her chest. People were shouting, cheering, some of them wiping tears from their eyes. Alina sat frozen at the piano, unable to process what was happening. This was not the polite applause that had followed the other performances. This was something else. This was an explosion of emotion, a room full of people who had just experienced something they did not expect. She looked out at the audience and saw faces, all of them looking at her with wonder and admiration. She saw the judges at their table, one of them openly crying, another shaking his head in disbelief. She saw donors and critics and celebrities, all of them on their feet, all of them clapping for her and in the front row. She saw Richard Hartwell. He was standing like everyone else, but he was not clapping. His hands hung at his sides, and his face was pale. He looked like a man who had just been proven completely, utterly, devastatingly wrong. Their eyes met for just a moment. Alina did not smile, did not gloat, did not show any emotion at all. She simply looked at him, and he looked at her, and something passed between them that needed no words. Then she stood, took a small bow, and walked off the stage. Behind her, the applause continued, echoing off the crystal chandeliers and marble floors. Following her like a wave that would not stop, she had done it. Against all odds, against all expectations. She had shown them exactly who she was, and this was only the beginning. Backstage, Alina could still hear the applause. It went on, refusing to die down even after she had left the stage. Other contestants stared at her as she walked past. Their expressions a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like respect. Nobody said anything. What could they say? They had all heard what Richard Hartwell said to her, and they had all just witnessed what happened next. Alina found a quiet corner and sat down on a folding chair. Her legs were shaking so badly, she was not sure they would hold her up any longer. Her hands were trembling too, the adrenaline still pumping through her veins. She looked down at her fingers, the same fingers that had just created something magical, and she could hardly believe they belonged to her. A staff member brought her a glass of water and she drank it gratefully. The cool liquid helped calm her nerves, but her heart was still racing. She had done it. She had actually done it. Whatever happened next, nobody could take this moment away from her. The remaining contestants performed after her, but Alina barely heard them. She was lost in her own thoughts, replaying the performance in her mind, wondering if it had really been as good as the audience's reaction suggested. Maybe they were just being polite. Maybe they felt sorry for her. Maybe the applause was not about her talent at all. But deep down, she knew that was not true. She had felt something during that performance, something she had never felt before. It was like the music had taken control of her body, using her as a vessel to express something bigger than herself. She had played pieces before that made her feel emotional, but this was different. This was transcendent. About an hour later, all the performances were finished, and the judges retired to a private room to make their decision. The contestants were told to wait in a holding area while the audience enjoyed refreshments in the ballroom. Alina stayed in her corner, avoiding eye contact with the others. She did not feel like talking. She did not feel like doing anything except waiting. The wait felt endless. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Alina watched the clock on the wall, counting the seconds, trying not to think about what the judges might be saying. Were they impressed by her performance? Or were they dismissing her as a novelty? A self-taught girl who got lucky once but did not have the training to be taken seriously. Finally, a staff member appeared and asked all the contestants to return to the stage. The winner would be announced in front of the full audience. Alina walked back onto the stage with the other 11 finalists. The lights were bright again, and the audience was back in their seats, buzzing with anticipation. She could see Richard Hartwell in the front row, sitting stiffly in his chair. He was not looking at his phone anymore. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. The host walked to the microphone, holding an envelope. He made a short speech about the importance of music education, the generosity of the Hartwell Foundation, and the incredible talent displayed by all the contestants. Alina barely heard any of it. Her eyes were fixed on that envelope, wondering what name was written inside. Before I announce the winner, the host continued, I want to share something special. One of our judges, Professor Whitmore from the Juilliard School, has asked to say a few words. An older woman stood up from the judges' table and walked to the microphone. Alina recognized her from the preliminary round, the woman who had been writing notes during her performance. Professor Whitmore had gray hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that seemed to see everything. In my 20 years of judging competitions, Professor Whitmore began, I have heard thousands of performances. Many of them were technically perfect. Many of them were impressive. But very few of them were truly memorable. She paused, her eyes scanning the contestants on stage. Tonight, I witnessed something I did not expect. I witnessed a performance that reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Alina felt her heart skip a beat. Was the professor talking about her? Or was this about someone else? Music is not just about hitting the right notes at the right time, Professor Whitmore continued. It is about communicating something that words cannot express. It is about touching people's hearts, making them feel things they did not know they could feel. Tonight, one performer did exactly that. And she did it without the benefit of formal training, without expensive instructors, without any of the advantages that most musicians take for granted. Now, there was no doubt. The professor was looking directly at Alina. Miss Vasquez, Professor Whitmore said, your performance of the Chopin Ballade was the most emotionally honest piece of music I have heard in 20 years. You played with a depth of feeling that cannot be taught in any classroom. Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know that you have a rare and precious gift. Please, never stop playing. The audience erupted in applause. Alina felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry on stage, not now, not in front of all these people. The host returned to the microphone, still holding the envelope. Thank you, Professor Whitmore, for those beautiful words. And now, the moment we have all been waiting for. He opened the envelope slowly, drawing out the suspense. Alina could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She gripped her hands together, her nails digging into her palms. The winner of this year's Hartwell Foundation Scholarship, receiving $50,000 and a full sponsorship to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music, is... He paused. The ballroom was completely silent. Alina Vasquez. For a moment, Alina did not move. She was not sure she had heard correctly. But then the other contestants started clapping, and the audience rose to their feet again. Someone was pushing her gently toward the front of the stage. She walked forward in a daze. The host was shaking her hand, saying something she could not hear over the roar of applause. Someone handed her a large check, the kind they use for photographs, with her name and the amount written in big letters. Cameras flashed from every direction. Alina turned to face the audience, the check in her hands, and for the first time that night she allowed herself to smile. It was a real smile, the kind that comes from deep inside, the kind that cannot be faked. She had one. She had actually won. She looked out at the sea of faces clapping for her, and her eyes found Richard Hartwell. He was still sitting in the front row, but he was no longer stiff and unreadable. He looked small, somehow diminished, like a man who had just realized he had made a terrible mistake in front of everyone who mattered to him. The investors he had laughed with backstage were now looking at him differently. The donors who had chuckled at his jokes about the street performer were now applauding the girl he had dismissed. A photographer had captured the moment perfectly. Hartwell sitting frozen while everyone around him stood and cheered. Alina did not feel angry when she looked at him. She did not feel vengeful or triumphant in a petty way. What she felt was something simpler and more powerful. She felt free. For years, she had been told she was not good enough, not rich enough, not connected enough to matter. For years, she had struggled in silence, working and practicing and hoping that someday someone would give her a chance. And now, finally, that chance had come. And she had proven once and for all that talent does not care about your background. It does not care about your clothes or your address or how much money your parents have. It only cares about what lives inside you and what you are willing to do to let it out. The host announced that Alina would also receive a debut recital at Carnegie Hall, one of the most famous concert venues in the world. The crowd cheered even louder. Alina felt dizzy, overwhelmed, like she was living inside a dream she was afraid to wake up from. But it was not a dream. It was real. All of it was real. She clutched the check in her hands and thought about her mother at home, waiting for news. She thought about the medical bills on the kitchen table, the ones that kept her awake at night. She thought about all the sacrifices, all the struggles, all the tears, and now, finally, all of it meant something. She had one. And no one could ever take that away from her. The night Alina won the competition, she took a taxi home for the first time in her life. She could have taken the bus like always, but she was carrying a giant check and a folder full of documents about her scholarship. And she was too exhausted to stand. The taxi driver recognized her from somewhere, but could not figure out where. She did not explain. When she walked into the apartment, her mother was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. The moment she saw Alina's face, she knew. She stood up, her hands flying to her mouth, tears already streaming down her cheeks. Alina held up the check, and her mother made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. They held each other for a long time, standing in that tiny kitchen where Alina had eaten cereal for dinner more times than she could count. "I knew it," her mother kept saying. "I always knew it." That night, Alina slept better than she had in years. But the story did not end there. In fact, it was only beginning. 3 days after the competition, someone posted a video online. It was filmed backstage at the Hartwell Hotel, and it showed everything. Richard Hartwell approaching Alina, his mocking smile, his cruel words, "You can't seriously expect to play here," his laughter, loud and dismissive, while the people around him joined in. The video spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 2 million times. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines appeared everywhere. Billionaire mocks poor musician, gets humiliated when she wins competition. Self-taught pianist silences arrogant billionaire with stunning performance. The girl he laughed at just won his own scholarship. People were furious. Comments poured in from around the world condemning Hartwell for his behavior. Former employees came forward with their own stories about his arrogance and cruelty. Sponsors who had partnered with the Hartwell Foundation began distancing themselves. One major corporation announced it was pulling its support entirely. Alina watched all of this unfold from her apartment, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was glad that people were seeing the truth about what had happened. But another part of her felt uncomfortable with all the attention. She had not asked for this. She had not even known she was being filmed. All she had wanted was a chance to play. Reporters started calling, asking for interviews. They wanted her to talk about Hartwell, to share more details about the humiliation, to add fuel to the fire that was already burning. Alina declined most of the requests. She did not want to become famous for being a victim. She wanted to be known for her music. 2 weeks after the competition, something unexpected happened. Alina received a letter at her apartment. It was handwritten on expensive paper. And it was from Richard Hartwell himself. She almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. The letter was not what she expected. It was not defensive or filled with excuses. It was an apology, a real one, written by a man who seemed to be genuinely ashamed of what he had done. He wrote that her performance had shaken him in a way he could not explain. He had spent his entire life believing that success came from privilege, from connections, from being born into the right family. Watching her play had forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth, that he had been wrong about almost everything. He wrote that he had behaved like a fool, worse, like a bully. He had let his own arrogance blind him to the beauty standing right in front of him. He wrote that he understood if she never forgave him. But he wanted her to know that he was sorry, truly sorry, for what he had said at the end of the letter. He mentioned that he was planning to make a public apology, not through a press release written by his lawyers, but in person at a press conference. He wanted to own his mistake in front of the same world that had witnessed it. Alina read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. A week later, Richard Hartwell held his press conference. Alina did not attend, but she watched it on television with her mother. Hartwell stood at a podium, looking older and more tired than he had at the competition. There were no assistants around him, no investors laughing at his jokes. He was alone. "I am here to apologize," he said, his voice steady but humble. "A few weeks ago I said something cruel to a young woman named Alina Vasquez. I dismissed her talent because of how she looked, where she came from, and what she lacked. I was arrogant and I was wrong." He paused, taking a deep breath. What she did that night on stage was extraordinary. Not because she won a competition, but because she showed everyone in that room what real courage looks like. She had every reason to walk away after what I said to her, but she didn't. She stayed and she played. And she proved that talent has nothing to do with money or privilege or where you went to school. Alina's mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "I cannot undo what I did," Hartwell continued, "but I can try to do better." Starting today, the Hartwell Foundation will launch a new initiative called the Vasquez Program. It will provide free music education to young people in underserved communities. Children who have talent but no access to training. I am committing $10 million of my personal fortune to this program, and I hope it will help other young musicians get the chances they deserve. He looked directly into the camera. "To Alina, if you are watching, I am sorry. You deserved better from me, and I hope that someday you might be able to forgive an old fool who learned an important lesson far too late." The press conference ended and the television cut to commentary. Alina sat in silence, processing what she had just heard. $10 million. A program with her name on it. Free music education for kids who were just like she had been. She did not know how to feel. Part of her was still angry, still hurt by what Hartwell had said. But another part of her recognized something she had not expected, genuine remorse. He had not just apologized, he had taken action. He had put his money where his mouth was, literally, and created something that could help thousands of children for years to come. A few days later, a reporter asked Alina for a comment on Hartwell's apology. This time, she agreed to speak. "I accept his apology," she said simply. "What he said to me that night was painful, but holding on to anger does not help anyone. If his program helps even one child discover their love of music, then something good will have come from all of this." The reporter asked if she had any message for young people who were struggling like she once had. Alina thought for a moment before answering. "Would tell them that your circumstances do not define you. I grew up poor. I taught myself on a broken keyboard. I had no connections, no advantages, nothing but a dream and the stubbornness to keep chasing it. And I am standing here today because I refuse to give up. So if you have a gift, nurture it. If you have a dream, chase it. And if someone tells you that you do not belong, prove them wrong." 6 months later, Alina made her debut at Carnegie Hall. The concert sold out in 11 minutes. People flew in from around the world to hear her play. Critics called it one of the most anticipated performances of the decade. When she walked onto that legendary stage, Alina felt a peace she had never known before. She thought about her mother in the audience, healthy now, the medical bills paid. She thought about the broken keyboard that had started everything. She thought about all the obstacles, all the doubts, all the moments when giving up would have been easier. And then she sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play in the back row. Almost hidden in the shadows sat Richard Hartwell. He had bought a ticket like everyone else. No special treatment, no front row seat. Just a man who wanted to hear music that had changed his life. When Alina finished her final piece, the audience rose as one. The applause was deafening. A wave of sound that seemed to shake the walls of the great hall, and in the back row, Richard Hartwell was the first to stand.